Welcome to TheoTrade. This is Don Kaufman. You were watching the Theo Night video for October 16th, 2017. Markets just closed moments ago, and we've actually got Netflix on deck right here, right now. It's coming out with its earnings any minute. It's really one of the first major tech stocks to kind of release earnings. We'll keep an eye on it here in the next few minutes as I record this, but let's get back over to the S&P 500 and specifically the S&P futures, and we'll start with a quick glance at these S&P futures. So what did we see inside of the futures today? Well, for the most part, they're massively unchanged. I mean, come on, another day when the S&Ps are up 3 points. This is like reminiscent of the day the earth stood still. Gort apparently is running this marketplace right now. You know, one of the real standouts today wasn't just that we had, kind of a slower day. The volume in the S&P futures, we only traded 748,000 contracts, okay? However, time out for just a second. There is movement in a number of major products that I'm going to show you here that is very, very peculiar with such low volume inside of the S&P. And that's really what I'm going to kind of bring to the forefront here. So for those of you, if you do not look at the S&P futures on a day-to-day basis, okay, that's fine, okay? Just realize when I say like low volume out there, it truly is one of the lowest volume days that we've seen yet. Again, in most of the recent trading sessions, we've been lucky to even crack over 1 million contracts in the S&P futures. 1 million contracts used to be a relatively slow day. I mean, just look back a few weeks ago, 1.2, 1.4 million contracts. So slow? No, this is non-existent. This is like one of those holiday trading sessions. Then you look at a calendar and you're like, hey, wait a second. This is October. This is usually when the markets are rocking. Now, as I said, there's a few things that really kind of stand out, I think, on my screen and that really starting to catch my attention. One of them has to do with the VIX. I'll come back to that here momentarily. And I'm going to come back to that momentarily because first and foremost, I want to bring up the Dow Jones transports. Now, this is not something that I would prototypically talk about, like, the transports over here. Don, why do you care about the transports? If you take a look at the Dow Jones transports, just literally, a day ago, this is on Friday, they were up almost 12% year to date. Now they're up basically 9% year to date. So you're getting about a 3% decline inside of our transports. You're like, great. What do we care? It's the transports. All right. This happens to be enough that it's starting to throw a little bit of cold water on top of the S&Ps. Okay. Now I see some movement in the futures over here in just the last second or two. My guess is Netflix has come out with their earnings. We'll cruise back to that here in just a moment. So why do I normally, care about these transports when prototypically I wouldn't even look at them? It's because when you look down at the financials, and I'll kind of highlight this for you for a second. You look at the financials, they're up 0.6%. Any of the recent trading sessions, any of the recent trading sessions where we've seen financials strong and technology strong, okay? When you've had financials and tech strong, you've seen the S&Ps explode to the upside. Today, not so much. Why? It's because the transports are that weak, okay? They're actually weighing on the S&P 500. So it's just a really, really notable aspect. The other aspect I want to throw out there for you is a lot of old school traders. And I work with a couple people here that have been in the business for over 40 years. They always tell me, like, look at the transports. The transports are often on the forefront. I'm not sure I necessarily buy into that all that much in today's marketplace. Nevertheless, I think it's viable to keep an eye on these transports in the next few days of trade because they did, in fact, dampen the spirits of the S&Ps today. Now, we're going to go look at the volatility here momentarily. As I said, financials bouncing back a little bit today, up 0.6%. Okay, Netflix, as I mentioned a moment ago, Netflix earnings, appear to be out. Stock not moving that much, had almost a $16 expected move. But hey, wait till the conference call and Reed Hastings say something, that could be, again, Netflix is known as the widow maker of earnings trades. For those of you that have absolutely no idea what that means, Well, the widowmaker of earnings trades, this was supposed to move $12 back here. It moved 22. That is not friendly if you sold options in it. Nevertheless, watching Netflix around earnings, it's, again, like watching a car crash over there. So what else did I see today that really struck me as a little bit unusual? And that's one of the things I wanted to bring up. So again, the transport's a little bit off the beaten path for me, okay? But what else really struck me? So I'm cruising around. It's a fairly boring market today, and then I happen to look over at the VIX. The VIX, well, it's having extraordinarily large activity. The reason I'm bringing up the activity in the VIX is we have a day where the S&P futures couldn't get out of their own way. They only did 750,000 contracts, which is, again, extraordinarily light. The VIX, on the other hand, which is definitely related, right? The VIX, on the other hand, does 1.4 times its normal daily option volume. The volume of the VIX hit almost 1 million contracts. Again, this is heavy stuff inside of the VIX. Now, that's 1.4 times the average volume versus the previous 5 days. So we're looking at really, really light trading sessions, and all of a sudden, with these really, really light trading sessions, we're seeing the volatility kind of spike up in here. Okay, so what's ultimately causing it? Part of it has a lot to do with this VVIX. For those of you, if you've never looked at the VVIX is the volatility of the volatility index, okay? What it tells you is how risky is the VIX itself, okay? And when you see the VVIX elevated, and right now, we can most definitively say the VVIX is still relatively elevated. One of the things that's kind of shocking right now is you have a marketplace that's at all-time highs, and yet there's still traders buying a lot of volatility. Now, I know that you don't see that reflected in the VIX. You're like, yeah, all right, whatever, Don. The VIX is at like, 9. It is, it's at 9. But traders are coming in here and they're buying volatility on the volatility index. And they're doing it, again, when the marketplace is at or near all-time highs. And this one kind of just begs the question. And now, not only are we seeing traders come in here and, again, maintain a higher VVIX, in addition to that, there's heavy activity in the VIX itself. The transports are coming off over here. The question that looms, are we at a turning point right now? Are we about to see, again, a bit more of a rush in terms of movement in the market? Because today, everywhere I look, again, there's no liquidity, there's no volume. At some point, we're going to snap. And that snapping doesn't necessarily mean, and I do not want to be, okay, crying over here, the markets are going to tank. The snap could actually be either way. But in terms of the low liquidity, we're getting to this point, and it's almost like a pressure point that we are very, very close to snapping. And that is that inflection that the VIX is telling me right now. And again, it's not so much the VIX itself. I don't care that the VIX is at 9.9. It's the heavy volume in the VIX. It's that the VVIX, again, traders, they're just loading up and buying volatility in what has been a no volatility marketplace. This trade alone can cause large movement in the markets. Lots to think about tonight. Again, Netflix kicked off the earnings season over here. The stock, at least in the aftermarket, is only mildly higher. Nevertheless, there's still a conference call to come. Thanks everybody for joining us at TheoTrade. Have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.